We're back, everybody, on Open Line tonight on Thursday night. Rhori Johnston with you. Phone lines are open if you would like to talk about your takeaways or have questions about the midterm elections. Right now, we're talking with our guest, Dr. John Weil, political analyst and a professor of political science at MTSU, a regular guest with us, talking about kind of the national picture before we chisel down into Tennessee, although Mike's question was great about that constitutional amendment. So we're talking about these outstanding vote counts in several states. A big question. We know, John, that every state handles their elections differently. It's not federal, it's the state. How can a state like Florida count, 7 million ballots on election day, have the results, and yet Nevada, Arizona, what's going on? Why in 2022 does it take so long to count ballots? And I will say, those folks who are election deniers, or even folks who just, are a little skeptical of the process, this just kind of feeds that fire. They want to know what's going on. Why? So talk about that, please.
I think the primary problem or the difference is absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, and in some states you cannot begin counting them until you've counted all the ones that occur in that day. And that was, that did feed into the election denial in the last presidential election, because initially Trump was in fact ahead of Biden, but Trump had encouraged his people to wait till election day, and so when those started coming in that had been cast earlier, that started to tip the direction. But Western states have a reputation for doing, having more of this, and this year, of course, California, Oregon are fairly slow, and then of course Nevada and Arizona, you have two very close Senate races.
So talked a lot, and I've got to address this kind of elephant in the room for our viewers in case someone's going to call in and start talking about 2020. And I will say this: I've been in this business for 30 years. There are really good investigative journalists all over the country, at local stations, national networks, newspapers, other news sources. I would say to people, if there really was some kind of fraud or a deliberate move to, add ballots or whatever, that former President Trump and many followers continue to push this, I think we would have proof by now that there's been sufficient investigating, digging. Not every and I know folks on Trump's side will say, well, it's because the media is liberal, and not all. That's not exactly true. If a really good investigative journalist were to uncover something like this, it would be, change their life. It'd be on the level of Watergate. It just hasn't happened. So that's what I tell people, saying, show me the proof. Show me real hard evidence, and it just hasn't happened yet.
Well,
go ahead.
And what I always add to that, if I may, this was probably, maybe with the possibility of the 2000 election, it's probably the most litigated election in our history. There were literally, 50 to 100 different suits that were filed. And what people need to remember, and I think most of your viewers know this, but you can get on television, and as long as it's not actually libelous, you can make any kind of claim you want. But if you go into a courthouse, they require you to lift your hand and put a hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth. Yeah. And there, if you lie, you're guilty of perjury.
Sure. So, Democrats, generally speaking, this is a generalization, Democratic voters tend to really appreciate the early voting, maybe absentee or mail-in especially. Republican political experts say a lot of Republicans like to go on Election Day. Republicans have criticized the continuation of a lot of early voting expansions, mail-in since the pandemic. Their argument is that opens up. There's so many more pathways to maybe shenanigans going on. Of course, if they can uncover real proof of that, then they might have an argument. So far, we haven't heard of that. But there is a push by some saying, all right, hold on, we've got to find a way to still allow the states to run their elections like they want to, but a little more conformity. So we have fewer questions. Maybe looking at, maybe this has gotten a little too loose. Instead of making it election month, before election day, maybe election week, or, trying to allow voters to go early and the convenience and all of that, but tightening it up a little bit. Do you see any of that potentially happening?
Well, we sometimes forget the idea of having an election on a single day is itself an innovation of the 19th century.
Yeah.
And I think where we're most likely to see some action in terms of national legislation has to do with the role of electors. And, we already have some states where if an elector is a so-called faithless elector and says they're going to vote for someone else, they can be replaced by someone who's going to honor the pledge. But there's been increasing concern since the last presidential election that, states should be bound by what their voters said, not by whether their governor or whether their legislature tends to be dominated by Democrats or Republicans.
Interesting. All right. I want to get into the Trump factor now because it seems in the last day or two, conservatives, I've heard and read some articles, Fox News, who else? Ben Shapiro, even Laura Ingraham, people like that are starting to say, don't announce if Donald Trump is indeed planning to announce soon that he's going to run again. They're now pushing the narrative of it's not going to work, that Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, should be the focus for the next election. And they list some pretty rational reasons for this argument.
Well, the most rational one is we have no idea how many indictments could come to fruition between now and the next election. I mean, it's a little bit like, nominating Herschel Walker. Yes, great name recognition, everybody knows him, great charisma, but you got all these things that keep popping up that are not, frankly, that that good. So I don't know. I mean, one fear is that Trump may actually be in part trying to run in order to keep the legal dogs at bay, for fear, well, people surely won't indict me if I'm running or if I'm actually in office.
All right, before our next break, also, one of my immediate takeaways is I saw the results and started to try to think, I think there's a possibility that a lot of voters out there who may have talked to the pollsters or not, Republican, independent, even some Democrats who recognize, we're in trouble economically right now and may have thought about, I think I'm going to vote for the Republican candidate because they're talking about these kitchen table issues. But then a little bit of further thought is, if I vote for this person, I'm hitching my wagon. I'm giving former President Trump kind of a pass to, yes, that means we want you. It's a referendum. We want you to run again. When maybe a lot of these voters are a little beleaguered have moved on from Donald Trump. Some Democrats too have moved on from President Biden and don't want him to run for re-election. But I think that may have played a role. They're looking ahead now. We need someone else. This is just too distracting, and it's kind of voter fatigue, right?
I think so. And the other issue to consider is that while Republicans talked a lot both about crime and about the economy, they really didn't have a clear message as to what they were going to do other than they weren't going to be Joe Biden.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. With that, we're going to take a break. We're going to start to hone in on what's going on in Tennessee and how redistricting affected the outcome. John Bile is our guest. We hope you'll call in. Phone lines are open. We'll be right back.